Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Wednesday, September 27th, 2023. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. Senate Stopgap bill includes $6 billion for Ukraine. So Senate leaders on Tuesday announced that they reached a deal on a stopgap funding bill that needs to be passed by September 30th to avert a partial government shutdown. And this bill includes $6.2 billion for Ukraine and $6 billion for natural disasters. So Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said in a statement, quote, "We will continue to fund the government at present levels while maintaining our commitment to Ukraine's security and humanitarian needs, while also ensuring those impacted by natural disasters across the country begin to get the resources they need," end quote. So this bill would be a short-term funding bill that would last until November 17th. So by including the $6.2 billion for Ukraine, this would ensure that the U.S. could continue to fund the proxy war against Russia during this time. Although the Pentagon has said that Ukraine operations would be exempted anyway if there is a shutdown, and the Pentagon still has a few $1 billion left. I would guess somewhere around $4 or $5 billion left that they can use to arm Ukraine, and that was made available by this so-called accounting error that they said they were overvaluing weapons that they sent to Ukraine, so it freed up a few billion more dollars. So, they'll be able to find the money wherever they can get it. So if this $6.2 billion for Ukraine is authorized and then spent, that would bring total U.S. spending on the war to about $119 billion. And once passed through the Senate, the stopgap funding bill could have a hard time making it through the Republican-controlled House. Sources told CNN that McCarthy told his team on Tuesday that he plans to amend the Senate bill to include border security funds that the GOP is looking for. And the CNN report also said that it's likely the Ukraine funding might be stripped from the House version of the bill. McCarthy has failed to move forward funding legislation due to opposition from more conservative Republicans in the House who are opposed to the spending levels of these funding bills that he's trying to put through. And they also oppose additional aid for Ukraine, so they're making things difficult for McCarthy. So I'm not sure how this is going to play out in the House, but we'll see. Again, this just shows the priorities of Congress. And in the Senate, in the House, you do have this opposition from some Republicans. It's not all Republicans in the House, but it's enough to make things a headache for McCarthy. But over in the Senate, Mitch McConnell is all about arming Ukraine. He says it's the most important thing for the Republicans to be focusing on right now. So it's not a surprise to see the Ukraine aid in their version of the stopgap funding bill. All right, so the next one here, a year of lying about Nord Stream. So this article is from Seymour Hersh at his Substack. And I didn't realize until I saw this that Tuesday, September 26th, marked 1 year since the bombing of the Nord Stream pipelines. And Seymour Hersh, he is the one who has alleged that it was President Biden who ordered the bombing of the pipeline and that U.S. Navy divers planted explosives during NATO exercises in the summer of 2022. And then it was done in coordination with Norway, and a Norwegian spy plane dropped a sonar buoy in September 2022 that triggered the explosions of the pipeline. His report has not been corroborated by any other sources, but he's still saying that it was Biden and that he's just been lying about this all along. So one thing that I thought was really interesting in this article that he put out, I just have to find it. Here it is. So he was talking to his sources, and essentially what they said was that, and again, these are sources he has in the intelligence world of Washington. And what they're telling them is that the destruction of the Nord Stream pipelines was not meant as an attack on Russia. They're saying it was meant to ensure that the government of German Chancellor Olaf Scholz did not get cold feet and restart the Nord Stream pipelines. Nord Stream 1 was not transporting gas at the time of the attack. It was shut off. It wasn't shut off. It was cut off, the supply from Russia to Germany, but there was still gas in the pipe, and that's why there was still gas under pressure. And Nord Stream 2 had never come online. The U.S. was trying to stop Nord Stream 2 for a long time with sanctions, and I think that's the best piece of evidence, on Hirsch's side, is the fact that President Biden, before Russia invaded, he said that the U.S. would bring an end to the pipeline to Nord Stream 2 if Russia invaded Ukraine. And then the other story that we're seeing from the mainstream press is that, U.S. officials are telling them that the attack is traced back to Ukraine. So they're putting the finger on Ukraine. Hirsch is still saying it was U.S. officials. And again, the motive, I think, is certainly on his side, the threats. And so anyway, but back to this story, I just want to read part of it, what this official told him. We realized that the destruction of the 2 Russian pipelines was not related to the Ukrainian war. Putin was in the process of annexing the 4 Ukrainian oblasts he wanted, but was part of a neocon political agenda to keep Scholz in Germany. With winter coming up and the pipelines shut down, from getting cold feet and opening up the shuttered Nord Stream 2. The White House fear was that Putin would get Germany under his thumb and that he was going to get Poland. The White House said nothing as the world wondered who committed the sabotage. So the president struck a blow against the economy of Germany and Western Europe, the official told Hirsch. He could have done it in June and told Putin, "We told you what we would do." The White House's silence and denials were, he said, a betrayal of what we were doing. If you were going to do it when it would have made a difference. So they're saying that they were threatening that the plan to blow up the pipelines was meant as a deterrence so Russia would not invade. And that's why they're saying if you were going to do it, you could have done it in the summer, but instead they waited for, before the winter. Pretty huge allegations here from Hirsch's sources. And again, another thing that I think makes me suspect it was the U.S. and it was Biden is how little they care. They haven't launched an investigation into the bombing, which was an attack on a NATO ally's infrastructure, Germany's infrastructure, even though it was owned by Russia's gas company, but it was a pipeline that delivered gas to Germany. And it was also, I believe, the largest release of methane gas that's ever happened. They say they care about all this environmental stuff, but they're not interested. So I would recommend go check this out. It's at Seymour Hirsch's Substack to kind of read more of the details. And a lot of the stuff on his Substack is behind a paywall, but this story is not, so you don't have to pay the $5 to read it. All right, so the next one here. A Russian commander shows up at a meeting after Ukraine claims he was killed. So the commander of Russia's Black Sea Fleet attended a Russian Defense Ministry video conference on Tuesday, a day after Ukraine claimed he was killed in a September 22nd missile strike on the fleet's headquarters in Sevastopol, Crimea. The Russian Defense Ministry released footage that showed Admiral Viktor Sokolov virtually attending a meeting led by Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu. In response to him appearing at the meeting, Ukraine's Special Operations Forces, which claimed that he was dead on Monday, said that it would clarify information about the missile strike. So if you're watching here, you could see the picture, and he's in the bottom left row on the screen. So Ukraine's Special Operations Forces said on Telegram, quote, "As is known, 34 officers were killed as a result of a missile attack on the headquarters of the Black Sea Fleet of the Russian Federation. Available sources claim that the commander of the Russian Black Sea Fleet was among the dead. Many still have not been identified due to the disparity of body fragments. Since the Russians were urgently forced to publish an answer with an apparently alive Sokolov, our units are clarifying the information. This is happening within the procedure for collecting data on the results of the operation," end quote. So they're still claiming that 34 Russian officers were killed in the strike, which is not confirmed because the Russian side hasn't said anybody was killed in this strike. They're saying only a serviceman was missing after the strike. And It's always worth noting that Ukrainian sources said in comments to media outlets that this strike was launched with the British-provided Storm Shadow missiles, so NATO missiles. Could have potentially killed some Russian naval officers, but we don't know the story, and I think this shows, and there's been other examples of this, like that missile strike that hit a market in the Donbass region earlier in September. Ukraine claimed was a Russian missile strike, and there was recently that New York Times article that said the evidence shows it was Ukrainian air defense missile that hit it. We know, that the Ukrainians lie and embellish, certain things when it comes to their military operations. It's part of their propaganda. All right, so the next one here, Kremlin says that U.S. Abrams tanks will burn. So on Tuesday, the Kremlin said U.S.-provided Abrams tanks in Ukraine will not impact Russian operations and will burn like other Western armored vehicles. These comments were made by Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov. So his comments came a day after Zelensky and U.S. officials said that the first batch of Abrams had arrived in Ukraine. And these tanks are armed with toxic depleted uranium ammunition. According to the Wall Street Journal, Ukrainian officials have acknowledged that the Abrams tanks are unlikely to significantly alter the shape of the war. With Ukraine's fall rains approaching, the weather is turning. Muddy conditions will make it difficult for the tanks to operate. And Ukraine did launch a big armored push in the first weeks of its counteroffensive, using the German-made Leopard tanks and U.S.-made Bradley fighting vehicles, and they were big targets for the Russians. The Ukrainians took a lot of losses they lost a lot of these armored vehicles in those first few weeks of the counteroffensive, and then they kind of changed their tactics, trying to demine the minefields and relying on artillery. So President Biden first announced that the U.S. would arm Ukraine with the Abrams tanks back in January. And if you remember around that time, Biden made that announcement. It was part of a deal to get Germany to agree to send Leopard tanks to Ukraine and to sign off on other European countries sending the Leopard tanks to Ukraine. Just a few days before Biden made the announcement, Pentagon officials said that Abrams, this is U.S. officials, said that the Abrams would not be practical for Ukraine since they're difficult to maintain and they're not, readily available. Spare parts and stuff aren't readily available in Europe like the Leopard. So, it really was just part of getting the Leopards over there was pledging to send Abrams. So, but now they're over there. All right. I want to take this moment to mention our sponsor for today's show, and that is the Expat Money Summit. So if you go to expatmoneysummit.com, you can get your free ticket to this event, which will be held from October 2nd to October 6th. And it's all online, so you could watch it from the comfort of your home. And this is hosted by Mikkel Thorup, who runs Expat Money, and it's a really great resource, his website and the work that he does for people that are considering moving out of the country, who are looking for different places to live, either as a primary residence or a backup plan, a way to protect your money, a way to find more freedom. That's something that he focuses on as well. And you can listen to big name speakers that will be there, including Peter Schiff, Mark Faber, Dr. Ron Paul, Doug Casey, Jim Rogers, and Tom Woods, and many more. And you'll learn things about residencies and citizenships in other countries, wealth protection and tax planning, investing and diversification, the expat lifestyle, community and network, and much, much more. So again, expatmoneysummit.com, or you can follow the link in the YouTube description or the podcast show notes. So again, expatmoneysummit.com. It's coming up. All right, so the next story here, where were we? Polish experts confirm missile that hit grain facility was Ukrainian. So this article is from Reuters. I just saw it right before I was going to start recording, so I didn't get a chance to write it myself, but it's interesting. It says that Polish experts have confirmed that the missile that killed 2 people at a grain facility in southern Poland in November was fired by Ukraine. And this was reported by Polish media, citing sources. And the explosion of the missile in NATO member Poland fueled fears that the war in Ukraine could spiral into a wider conflict Because at the time, Ukrainians, this was another example of the Ukrainians lying, saying that it was a Russian missile when it was very clear. And, the U.S. and NATO have all sorts of radars. They knew immediately, I'm sure, that it was not a Russian missile. And these sources with knowledge of the investigation had established that the missile was an S-300 5W55 air defense missile fired from Ukrainian territory, which has a range of 75 kilometers to 90 kilometers. And they said at the time, Russian positions were in a place from which, if this was fired by Russia, it couldn't reach the village that it hit. And Ukraine has denied that one of its missiles had landed in Poland. And what's interesting here is that this report says the Ukrainian side has not made any material available to Polish investigators. So Ukraine appears to still be denying that it was their missile and they were not helping out with the investigation. So maybe that's another reason why the Poles are not happy with Ukraine, is because they're not cooperating with this incident did kill two Polish people. All right, so the next one here, Israeli minister in Saudi Arabia for the first time. So Israeli tourism minister, totally pronounced that wrong. Israeli tourism minister Haim Katz arrived in Saudi Arabia on Tuesday for a UN conference, making him the first senior Israeli official to publicly visit the kingdom, which comes as the U.S. is pushing for a Saudi-Israeli normalization deal. So Katz said, quote, "Tourism is a bridge between nations. Cooperation in the field of tourism has the potential to bring hearts together and economic progress. I will work to advance cooperation, tourism, and the foreign relations of Israel," end quote. So as Katz arrived in Saudi Arabia, a Saudi delegation arrived in the West Bank. Riyadh has said that any normalization deal with Israel must include advancements toward a Palestinian state. And according to Middle East Eye, the visit marked the first time Saudi officials were in the West Bank since the 1993 Oslo Accords. So during the visit, Saudi ambassador to Jordan, Naif al-Sudari, who has been appointed as an envoy to Palestine, said that Riyadh is working toward establishing a Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as the capital. The truth is, any agreement, toward that end is unlikely right now with the Israeli government because it includes extremist settlers who want to annex the entire West Bank. But they're probably going to try to get some sort of guarantees for the Palestinians, for the Palestinian Authority, whatever they want, which doesn't really reflect what the Palestinians want. They're not very happy with the PA. So these two pretty notable visits come after Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman said in an interview with Fox News that every day they get closer to a Saudi-Israel normalization deal, and he denied reports that said Riyadh pulled out of the talks. So the Biden administration is pushing really hard for this normalization deal. I believe they want it as a pre-election thing. And they're looking to build on similar agreements with Bahrain and the UAE, known as the Abraham Accords, as a condition for normalizing with Israel. As we've been covering, the Saudis are making significant demands of the U.S., including stronger security guarantees. And they're discussing the idea of a mutual defense treaty, which would involve the U.S. pledging to defend Saudi Arabia if it comes under attack. They already, have something, similar, just not in writing, considering how much the U.S. has been helping the Saudis in Yemen in that war. But this really risks getting the U.S. involved in another Middle East war or the war in Yemen escalating, because there's been a de facto ceasefire there that's held since April 2022. According to the New York Times, MBS regards the Mutual Defense Treaty with the U.S. as the most important element in his talks with the Biden administration about Israel. So that's what he wants more than anything. And the U.S. and Israel, they really envision the Abraham Accords creating an anti-Iran alliance in the region between Israel and the U.S.'s Arab allies. That's the idea. They want to kind of form a Middle East NATO that's an anti-Iran alliance. But the recent Iran-Saudi-China brokered normalization deal has thrown a wrench into the plan, as Riyadh and Tehran are working on repairing relations So they're certainly not, the Israelis were not happy when that happened. But the Saudi-Israel normalization seems to be moving along faster than I thought that it would happen. And the next one here, more than half of Americans oppose a defense pact with the Saudis. This is a poll. This article is from the Middle East Eye, and it is a poll that found 55% of Republicans and Democrats said that they were against any sort of defense pact with Saudi Arabia. But the opinion of the American people, doesn't really matter much. Unfortunately, you would think that number should be much higher, but 55% still is the majority. All right, so the next one here, the Philippines want to retake a shoal from China. So the Philippines is taking steps to retake Scarborough Shoal, which is a disputed chain of rocks and reefs in the South China Sea that has been controlled by China since 2012. So Philippine Coast Guard Commodore J. Torrelia, he said, quote, "Since the new administration took office, we have already strategized how we can take control once again of Scarborough Shoal, especially the lagoon," end quote. So his comments came a day after he said that the Philippine Coast Guard removed a floating barrier that was planted by China near Scarborough Shoal that Manila said impeded Philippine vessels. And I watched, there was a video of them cutting this barrier, which was basically just buoys and connected by a cable. So they cut the cable. And, people that follow the South China Sea things say that this is, the Philippines doing that is kind of a big deal. And it came on the order. It was a direct order from the Philippines president, Ferdinand Marcos Jr. And according to the South China Morning Post, I thought this was interesting that this specific reef, Scarborough Shoal, if you're watching here, there's a map that shows the location of it. China had allowed Philippine fishing vessels to return there when relations were better under Marcos's predecessor, Rodrigo Duterte, but tensions have significantly increased since Marcos came into office last year, June 2022. He took over. And since then, tensions between China and the Philippines have significantly escalated as Marcos is moving much closer to the U.S. and signed a deal granting the U.S. military access to 4 new bases in the Philippines. The U.S. and the Philippines have also increased military exercises and recently conducted a joint patrol in the South China Sea. And the U.S. has strongly backed Manila's claims to the South China Sea and has repeatedly warned Beijing that the U.S.-Philippine Mutual Defense Treaty covers attacks on Philippine vessels in the water. So that means this area is a potential flashpoint for a war between the U.S. and China. And that means the Philippines trying to retake this shoal could potentially spark some sort of, armed confrontation between the Philippines and Chinese Coast Guard vessels. And then the U.S. could potentially use that as justification to intervene and go to war with China. That's how crazy, handing out all these defense guarantees is. I think it's a great argument against why we should be giving more to the Saudis. All right, so the next one here, Erdogan wants F-16s in exchange for Sweden in NATO. So Erdogan, Turkey's president, said Tuesday that the Turkish parliament will ratify Sweden's NATO membership as long as the U.S. follows through on its plans to sell Turkey F-16 fighter jets. So Erdogan told NATO back in July that Turkey's parliament would approve Sweden's membership when it reconvenes this fall. So far, there has been no vote. And this F-16 deal that Turkey is seeking and is expected to be worth $20 billion, so it's a big deal. It's basically been linked to Turkey approving Sweden's NATO bid. That's what Biden administration officials have hinted at, if not outright said, that if Turkey approves Sweden's NATO bid, they'll get the F-16s. So Erdogan is saying, they got to do that for us to approve this. And the reason why I think he's bringing it up is because Bob Menendez, the Democratic senator from New Jersey, who was just indicted from corruption and was the head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, but now he's stepped down. He's refusing to resign as a senator, but he did step down from that post. He was the big opposition to this F-16 deal. I guess Turkey didn't give him enough gold bars or whatever. So the Biden administration supports this deal. Menendez was against it, and he had a lot of power on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So Erdogan actually said on Tuesday, now that Menendez is gone, let's go. Let's push this thing through. He said, quote, thanks to this development, we may have an opportunity to speed up the process regarding the F-16 sale. Menendez and those who share his mentality are not only creating obstacles on the F-16, but on all other issues, end quote. So I thought that was just interesting that Erdogan brought that up. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. upgrades ties with Kenya for a Haiti intervention, and this article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. So this Haiti intervention, Kenyan-led U.S.-backed intervention, seems to be imminent. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin was just in Kenya, and on Monday they inked a new defense cooperation agreement. And basically, this is part of the deal to get Kenya to intervene in Haiti. The U.S. is going to fund this mission. They've pledged $100 million to foot the bill for this intervention. And, it seems like, I'm not sure exactly the timeline, but it seems like they got everything together now for this intervention in Haiti. And again, there's a very dark history of Western and UN intervention in Haiti with UN, what they call peacekeepers, raping underage girls, and cholera outbreak that was tied to the UN peacekeepers that were there. And I know many Haitians do not want something like this to happen, but it seems like they got the ball rolling now on this plan. And the last one here is one from Connor Freeman. The U.S.-backed SDF imposes curfew in eastern Syria. So this is another article from the Libertarian Institute. And after weeks of clashes between the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces and Arab tribesmen aligned with the Deir ez-Zor Military Council, the SDF has imposed a curfew following a resumption of fighting on Monday. These ethnic tensions are boiling over in eastern Syria's Deir ez-Zor province, which is illegally occupied by the U.S. and its SDF partners as the Arab majority resists Kurdish rule. So this is an important point about this situation in eastern Syria. The SDF was basically the U.S. ground troops when they were fighting against ISIS in 2016, 2017. The U.S. was just bombing the hell out of these cities that ISIS was in, including these Arab areas in eastern Syria, and the SDF were able to take control, and they have not relinquished control in Arab majority areas that don't want to be under their thumb. And there has been issues, and things have really boiled over here, and there's been lots of fighting, and now the SDF is imposing curfews as an effort to quell the fighting and the attacks and things that are happening. So there you go. That's it for the news for today. Go check out our Viewpoints, one from Caitlin Johnstone. Bill Kristol's refreshingly honest ad supporting the Ukraine war. One from Ted Snyder, a rough diplomatic week for Ukraine. One from Camilo Macbica, the nation owes a debt to the Vietnam veterans against the war. One from Sareb Almari, just say no to Mid-East defense pacts. And our spotlight is from Kelly Vlahos over at Responsible Statecraft. 1 year later, why is the Nord Stream attack still a mystery? But that is everything. You could always help us out by sharing the show, liking, subscribing on YouTube, following us on social media, mainly on Twitter is where we're active. You could follow me at DeCampDave. You can follow the antiwar.com account as well. That's it. Again, I appreciate everybody that's listening and watching and commenting and all the feedback I get and emails and stuff. I really appreciate it. I'll be back tomorrow with some more news for you. Thanks for listening.